So what is intrinsic load actually, and how does it work in cognitive load theory? So let's do this in detail and then give a good example so we get a feeling for it. Let's start with the definition, right? So it's, and I'm just going to highlight it for us. It's a load that occurs. It's a load. It's something which carries weight as learners complete components of a learning task. Right, so it's what you're actually doing in the lesson, and it's impacted by two things. It's impacted by task complexity, how hard and difficult is it, and how much knowledge does the learner have, right? Now, if you think about it, it's pretty obvious that your intrinsic load, the weight that you're carrying, the heaviness of the lesson, is going to be increased by the complexity of the task. The harder the task is, well, the heavier the intrinsic load is. But right on the other side of it, you have to take into account the experience of the learner, because the less experienced the learner is in the area that they're working on, the more they're going to experience it as being hard. The intrinsic load is going to increase. Now, what can you decrease the intrinsic load by? Well, number one, if you build the relevant schema in long-term memory, expertise. In other words, if the learner already understands something about the area which you're doing and has got some history, some basis for already understanding the zone, well, the learner is going to experience it as being easier, and you're going to lift a little bit of the intrinsic load off. But if the learner hasn't got experience, well, then what you're going to do is you're going to make the task more simple. You're going to subdivide the learning task into its component parts, into its different elements, and you're going to give that to the learner first so that the learner can see the basics of how it works, put that into long-term memory, and then use that as their relevant schema. Right, so the rule of thumb, because bear in mind we're doing this to improve technical and vocational teaching and learning. And what we're now asking is, well, then how do you actually maximize learning, right? How do you maximize? Well, it's optimization. You're trying to get it balanced. You're trying to get it at a zone where the learner feels stretched but still comfortable. If it's too high, cognitive overload is going to result, and the learner is going to become confused and is going to disengage. But if it's too low and it's too easy, the learner is going to become apathetic and bored. Right? So let's try and give an example over here. And let's say the example is, and sorry, I'm just going to go up here to use this nice little code over here. Let's say you've got a question, and what you're asking is you're asking the learner to compare types of doors. Right? This is we all know what doors are. And you've got to compare two types of doors. On the one side, you've got panel doors, and on the other side, you've got these ledge and batten doors. Now, if you're like me, you kind of know what panel doors are, but these ledge and batten ones aren't going to be clear. So if you ask someone to compare these two types, they're not going to know how to do it, and it's going to be difficult for them to do. And in that situation, what you have to do is you have to take the learner or the student through the basics first, where you break it down. And you say to the student, look, here we go. What's a ledge? Well, a ledge is something that goes across. And what does it do? Well, it supports and holds the battens together. And that's a ledge and batten door. Oh, the student goes, well, now I understand what a ledge is and I understand what a batten is. That makes some sense. Yes, you go, but it's more complicated than that. If you want to make the door stronger, well, then what you've got to do is you've got to put braces in. That makes the door even stronger. Oh, says the learner, I understand ledges, battens, and braces now. Yay. You go, yeah, but in actual fact, a better way of doing it even still is to make sure that you put a frame in place, because the frame really results in stabilization of the door. And that finally results in a situation where the student can go, oh, okay, I know what the battens are. I know what the braces are. I know what the ledges are. And I know what the frame is. And now what I can do is I can try to do a comparison between this kind of a door and a panel door, which is so different. A panel door looks, and it's got a different language, and it works on a completely different system where you've actually got these panels or these holes which you can put lighter and cheaper wood inside, and it's actually quite strong. And so you can start to do the comparison. But just to go back now to reinforce what we're talking about, if the student already understands how these doors work, well, then they're in a situation where they're going to want to compare all sorts of types of doors. And you can give them an example. You can say, what types of doors do you need in an airport or in a school? You can make the task more complex. But if the learner doesn't have that schema understanding of the different types of doors, well, then what you've got to do is you've got to break the learning task down into its component parts. And you're doing that. Why? Because you're doing that to build up the schema so that the learners can do the more complex task in the end.